The door sounds like it's having a rough day, doesn't it? How is everybody? Doing okay? I feel like I owe you an apology. I got home and I was talking to my partner. I'm like, we have a long weekend this weekend. She's like, you're a week early. I'm like, no, we have Monday off. She's like, it's next Monday. I was like, I told all my classes we had a long weekend. She's like, well, you better apologize. So, sorry, I was off by a week. I feel like I should correct that, right? So we have a normal week next week, and then it's the following week that we have a week off. So, or a day off, not a week. Look, I'm just thinking about all this vacation time, apparently, right? Well, anyway, I felt like I should correct that. So sorry for getting your hopes up artificially. It's coming, just not quite yet. Okay? I think I'm ready for a break. It's hard to transition back, right? Like I'm tired, but I got new pens, so I'm super excited about that, right? The little things with school, right? School supplies are fun. Anyway, and I looked one more thing up. So a lot of you were asking questions last time, just before we jump into chapter 2. I looked up just to make sure, I think you were asking Jennifer about the number of hours for like licensing. And so I looked it up for everybody, just out of curiosity, and they're all the same, right? I thought there was a difference, but so for a licensed clinical social worker, for an MFT, for a clinical psychologist, and for a psychiatrist, it's 3,000 hours for all of them before you can take the licensing test, right? So it's actually the exact same. What was that? Oh,
Do you think they all get double points if they're
Yeah.
actually doing therapy?
Yes, yes. So if you go to therapy yourself, every hour counts as 2, which a lot of people do, obviously, because you want as many hours as you can get. And then sometimes, so the first 1,500 hours of these have to be done before you have the degree, or can be done before you have the degree. And then the other 15 have to be after. So they split it as well, right? So just a couple little other details. And then one more thing, just to clarify. So the PsyD, right, is more for people. So PsyD is 4 to 6 years. And for people who only want to go into clinical, so there's no research, no educational base. It's just for people who want to be like a therapist or clinical. I switched them, so sorry about that. In my mind, I had them clear, and then I switched it. And then a PhD, as I put up before, is like 5 to 6 years, so a little bit longer, right? And that's for people who want to maybe be like a researcher, a clinician, or like go into education. It's a little more broad and scientific based. So just a couple of little bits from last time. I went back and was like, I'm gonna find out those hours because I couldn't remember for psychiatry. I thought it was more, but they're actually all the exact
Thank you.
same. Yeah, of course, of course. So where we'll go here today, chapter 2. And these models should look familiar. I don't think it's required, but it's strongly suggested. How many of you have taken intro psych at some point? Okay. A lot of you, if not, it's okay. But if you've taken it, these are going to look familiar, right? Psychology is all about models or theories. That's a huge part, especially of like introductory level classes. So what we'll look at in this chapter are what are the different models of abnormality? Like, so how could we view a disorder or abnormality in our case through each of these different models? So each model is going to explain like what causes the disorder and how we treat it. And we tend to kind of look at them all together, but first we'll separate them and look at them individually. So again, 2 more chapters, this one and one more, and then we get to the disorders. But the models that we'll look at are these sets of assumptions, right? They're concepts or assumptions or kind of guidelines, if you will, that are going to allow us to view a disorder through a certain lens. So for example, and we'll talk about each one of these, we could say that disorders are caused by biology, by neurotransmitters, by brain abnormalities. Freud would say that they were caused by the unconscious mind in early childhood and probably your mother, right? Everything back to the mom with Freud. So each model says kind of a slightly different thing. And you can look at them in isolation, but what we tend to do now is kind of combine them all together, like I said. So we'll look at each one and kind of some of its main ideas. And then when we get to the disorders, you'll see these all come back because some disorders are better explained by certain models and certain treatments go with them. And so we'll look at each one and some different types of like therapies and treatments, starting with biology. And this is a big one, right? And honestly, they all have like a lot of a contribution, but biology is a really big one in our field, right? Where we look at physical causes for disorders. So we're looking at each one having like a physical component to it. I'm gonna write things up here. I debated for a minute, like it's so far away. So the biological model. I'm gonna say that we have physical causes for disorders. Okay, like the ones up here. So a big one would be like neurotransmitters, anatomy, something biological or physical is causing you to develop a mental illness. Anatomy is a big one, right? Different structures in the brain are in charge of different things. If someone has damage to one of them or it's not functioning properly, that could contribute to depression, to anxiety, to schizophrenia, to all sorts of different disorders that we're going to talk about. Brain chemistry is probably the biggest one up here, right? Neurotransmitters. Can anyone give me an example? What's a neurotransmitter? Give me one of them. Yeah. Dopamine, big one. How about another one? Yeah. Serotonin. Those are the two probably biggest, right? Anyone else think of one? Couple more? Yeah. Hormone, right? But really, really like close. So hormones go through the blood, neurotransmitters through the nervous system, but they work together, right? Anyone have another one? You can think of, oh, I'm sorry. Yes, GABA is another one. Glutamate, right? Acetylcholine. There's a bunch of these. And they play a really big role in how our brain functions. Serotonin, huge culprit for depression. And same with dopamine, right? There's a lot of these different ones. And if they're out of balance, then it can affect your system, right? So if you have too much or too little of a neurotransmitter, it can wreak havoc. So we have lots of medications to help us with that, which we'll get to. Brain circuits, kind of a newer one, right? So depression, for example, we've discovered a brain circuit that's thought to contribute to depression. It's a cluster of different parts of the brain that all aren't working properly and create like a perfect storm. So you could have little circuits or combinations of parts of the brain that maybe aren't working quite right. And together, right, they're going to cause us to have issues. We'll get to that, especially with depression. There's a new one that we've kind of discovered in the last 10 years that's thought to be a big contributor. Genetics, sadly, you can inherit disorders, right? If one of your parents has a disorder, you might be more likely to get it. You're not doomed to get it, but they can run in families and be a little bit genetic. So I'll add that over there in a second. And then viral infections, right? So there are a few where people might be more prone if they had like an infection during pregnancy, or at different points in their developmental timing. So imaginetics is a little bit.
Will you write bigger for the old lady in the back?
What was that?
You write bigger.
I could try. That's actually really big for me. But yeah, I will try to.
Thank you.
So all of these together, like you don't have to have all of them, but they are all like big contributors from this model. And hormones could be another one, like oxytocin, and quite a few others, whether like cortisol for stress, which we'll get to. But hormones, which go into our bloodstream, can also play a big role in our mood, and a lot of different functionings in our system. Yeah. It could be either. So the tricky thing is it's okay. So it's a little bit anatomical. It could even be its own bullet, right? Because it's a little anatomical in the sense that it's different parts of the brain, but it's thought that those different parts of the brain then affect our chemistry in the brain. So I put it there, but it could technically be on its own, right? It's something that's really emerging. We're seeing a lot of circuits or clusters that therefore then affect our chemistry by affecting neurotransmitters. So yeah, it could be a standalone bullet even. Push it over. Anybody else for now? Any other thoughts or questions? Right. So if we think it's a physical cause, biological cause, then we're going to go with a biological treatment. Okay? And that's kind of what you see with these models. They spell out what we think causes it and what we think is going to help treat it. And so within this model, medication is the biggest one, right? And this is the second time we've put medication up here. It was in chapter 1 as well. But medications are going to affect those balances of neurotransmitters. Selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, or SSRIs, we use a lot for depression to change the amount of serotonin to alleviate depression, right? A lot of medications, depending on which neurotransmitter we think is out of balance. Not the most popular, But the next group here are brain stimulation methods. These are growing in popularity, especially this one right here, right? But if somebody is unresponsive to medication, there are some brain stimulation methods we can try within this framework. The old standby was electroconvulsive therapy, ECT, right? Electroconvulsive therapy was developed like way back in time. It's been refined for a long time. It kind of an interesting history with this one. All the way back in like the 16th century, we were using different agents to cause people to have almost like a seizure or lose consciousness as a way to try and jumpstart or reset their brain. In 1934, and you don't need to know the year, but in 1934, a physician decided to try an electrical current for the first time on a patient. It was a young man who had really intense schizophrenia. He hadn't spoken a word in months. And so they passed a current of 55 amps through his brain for 2 seconds. The guy had a massive grand mal seizure, but he sat up and said, "What the F are you trying to do to me?" And they considered it a great success. He spoke, right? Woo, we won, right? And we've been refining it ever since. Okay, so back then it was like a very harsh electrical current. But now what we do is we put these little electrodes and we send electrical currents to the brain. It is a very invasive procedure, right? Often used for depression. It can lead to a lot of like memory loss and issues with like dissociation. Thankfully, we have a newer one, but I found a clip from One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, which came up last time a couple of people had brought it up. It shows what this looked like. It was a horrible procedure. They still do it, right? Not as frequently, but they still do it. Let me show you a clip of this. And this is completely fictional, but it's pretty accurate. And this is from that movie, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. Let me pause this. Give you a sedative now so you don't have as much of a seizure as like he did there. You don't convulse as much. But you notice there's a bunch of people holding him down, right? What we've done since that was developed has been trying to work on other ways of doing this more effectively and less invasively. And thankfully, we have a newer method. And this is like 10 years ago. It was obscure, it was expensive, it was really hard to get. Now this is something that's becoming really readily available. And that's TMS. How many of you have heard of TMS before? Right, several of you really commonly used for like depression that's not responsive to medication. But with TMS, you go in and they put a little magnetic coil above your head inside this machine, and it sends targeted pulses rapidly. It's like 20 something of them in a matter of a couple of seconds. And you sit there under this machine, awake, alert. You don't take any medication or anything. Sometimes people take Tylenol to like if it gives them a headache, but it sends really rapid currents to a tiny little spot in the brain that's thought to control serotonin. We'll talk about that when we get to the unit on depression, but it's been shown to be wildly more effective, and it is so much less invasive. You can drive yourself there and drive yourself back, right? Versus ECT, you're out of it sometimes for days afterward. It's a very old method. And TMS is something that's newer and starting to replace it. Right? So some methods that we can do if people aren't responsive to like traditional medication, but medications by a landslide are the most common treatment here. And then in rare cases, surgery, right? If there's something going on in the brain that we can surgically address, we would do it, right? But that's not often the case. It's usually medication or one of those brain stimulation methods. Any thoughts or questions, anything about any of these for now? You'll see them again when we get to depression, but anything for now? Yeah. So we'll talk about them later, but it's selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. They're the most common drug class for depression. Right? So they work on serotonin by limiting the reuptake of serotonin to create more of it to hopefully help with depression. Anyone else for now? Yes. All right. Next model. Freud. Good old Freud, right? The face of psychology. I don't know why, right? But he'll always be the face of psychology. You know it's Freud if he has a cigar, right? Freud was incredibly addicted to cigars. The most famous psychologist of all time died from his addiction. he died of cancer in the mouth from smoking cigars his entire life, right? A little unknown fact commonly ignored about him, I'll say. But when you think of Freud, what do you think of? What comes to mind when you hear like Freud's name? Do you have like things that pop in your head? Yeah. The unconscious, for sure. What else? Anyone else? Yeah. Okay. The Oedipus complex, another famous idea of his. Definitely the mom, right? He's all about your mom. He's all about early childhood, right? Like everything goes back to mom and the little things that happen when you were young, sex and aggression, the libido. His theories are a little bit out there, right? Not a lot of great modern support for his ideas, but he was the one who kind of founded all of it. He was the first big name in psychology and came up with a lot of ideas that everybody else built on, right? So Freud, the psychodynamic or psychoanalytic model is what he called his theory. You turn that a little bit here.
Thank you.
Yeah. So you can go either way, psychodynamic or psychoanalytic. So with this one, we're looking at the unconscious. We're talking about in a second. You're talking a lot about early childhood. And then sex and aggression. So Freud, in his theories, talked a ton about the unconscious mind, right? And the unconscious is something you can't see, you can't measure, but where do you think it might come out? Where does the unconscious come out? Anyone know? Any guesses? Where might it reveal itself? Yeah, dreams, right? Dreams and Freudian slips were the two ways he said your unconscious mind could come out. So when you dream at night, it was thought that the unconscious mind could kind of bubble up. Or if you say the wrong thing. I used to have a biology instructor in high school, and he was so cringy, but he would constantly be like, this organism, right? And he would say it like every time, and it was so slimy, right? Like creepy. But he would say orgasm instead of organism. We're like, we know what's on your mind, right? Or if you say the wrong name, Freud would say that person was on your mind. You forget an appointment. It's because you didn't want to go, right? He would say all these things are really meaningful. And I kind of love the dream interpretation stuff. I'm big on dream interpretation. I think they can be wildly meaningful and wildly random at the same time. Right? I got my soccer lists yesterday, and all night I had soccer dreams because it was on my mind, right? And Freud would say that tends to be how it would manifest. They were random, so random. Like we were playing soccer in the ocean. Like I think I was thinking about my knee too, or I don't know. But according to Freud, that's one way that that would come up through dreams and also through Freudian slips. He sometimes used the analogy of an iceberg. So if you, again, I'm not artistic, but here's an iceberg, right? And the water line. I feel like there should be like a Titanic going toward it. Like there's my Titanic, Jack at the front. I should keep these, I don't know what's going on with his legs, right? But I should keep these things to myself, but yeah, I'll put it up there anyway. But Titanic, iceberg, right above the water would be the conscious mind. What you are aware of, what you are doing right now, what you're thinking about, what you're feeling, stuff that is current and like you're thinking about and processing right now. Right under the water would be the subconscious or the preconscious. So you probably weren't thinking about what you had for breakfast. But the second I say it, you can bring it into your mind quickly. Hopefully you had breakfast, right? Or the feeling of your shoes touching your feet. But if I bring it to your attention, you'll start thinking about it. You can ignore it now because it's not helpful, right? But it's stuff that quickly comes into your mind if you just think about it. But what he was interested in was what was way down here. The unconscious was buried deep down, stuff from your early childhood. Freud believed that your early childhood stuff was by far the most important contributor. Your relationship with your parents, your sexual and aggressive urges that you had as a child as you went through different stages of like psychosexual development. So he was very interested in what's buried down here, which you could access through therapy a little bit over time and through dreams and slips and so on. Very obsessed with sexuality. He is famous for a term called libido, right? Your sexual energy that you possess. And he talked a lot about this energy going to different parts of the body as you're a child. He loses a lot of people on things like the potty training and the sexuality behind it, right? But very prominent role of, again, like early childhood stuff, sexuality, and so on. From his perspective, he also talked a little bit about where that energy can kind of manifest itself. Very famous idea of his, the id, the ego, and the superego. We talked a lot about these three like forces of personality. They aren't structures, they're like forces within your mind. And I love this picture. It's so like graphically representative of them. The id is like the little devil or demon on your shoulder, right? It's the part of you that's all about pleasure. I want what I want. I want it right now. The hell with the consequences. Not a single one of you is giving into your id right now, right? Your id is in check. You're sitting here like comfortably. Like I might be down getting donuts or something, and I would steal them if I'm really going with the id. Like, why pay for them, right? It gets you into trouble if you give into the id. It's very pleasure driven and aggressive and sexual and kind of demanding what it wants. On the extreme other end is the superego. It's like the angel on your shoulder, your conscience, your ideal, the part of you that says, no, you shouldn't do that. You shouldn't do this. It's a lot of the shoulds, right? It's very much the opposite end. And then the ego is the part in the middle that's kind of in contact with reality of like, okay, yeah, you might want a donut. You're not going to go eat 12 of them and you're not going to steal them. And you shouldn't do that right now, but maybe after class, you could go get one or two, right? It's like the compromiser in the middle, keeping you in contact with reality. I mean, so wise mind was more Carl Jung, actually, his student, his beloved son, who told him. But did you have more to say?
No, I was just saying like logic, emotion.
It's a similar threat, right? Of like you're trying to balance the logical side and the emotional side with like the wise, like kind of compromising in the middle, like checking the facts and staying in contact between the two. Similar thread, but this one was more like kind of the immediacy of like right now and trying to compromise, but kind of a similar idea in a way. Taking things. I was giving into my violent, aggressive urges. Any other questions or thoughts about this one for the moment? Within his therapy, Freud's therapy still practiced, therapy that started it all. Okay, this is a very long, slow, kind of everyday sort of thing, type of therapy. And it's not practiced a lot anymore because insurance doesn't cover it, right? It's not something that insurance is going to support going every day for like 10 years, right? But Freud believed that therapy should be like almost a daily thing. And what you would do often in his therapy is you would sit on a couch. He's the one who invented the couch and the whole idea of that, or couch in therapy, I mean. Right? But you would sit on a couch and free associate. Free association means you just say whatever comes to mind. You don't censor it. You don't limit it. You just literally put it all out there. And you could do this in a couple of ways. You could literally just talk and let it be kind of like a stream of consciousness. You could do this as a writing assignment, which I always think is more fun because you can kind of jump all over the place with it. Or he would sometimes do word association, where he would give you a word and then you would respond with the first word that came to mind. Very common Freudian technique. And they look for themes, like is there stuff that's coming up? Do you get stuck on a word, right? Like if I said the word breakfast, apparently I'm thinking about food, breakfast, like what comes to mind instantly? Probably an easier one than maybe if I said mother. From this perspective, it might be a little more loaded, right? But you should have a word or like a thought or something that comes to mind if you're focusing on it. I found an example of this. If you've seen the movie Skyfall, there's an example of this in there. Let me play that for you. And you can see he gets stuck on a word. And it's because it's something he did with the others. And so Freud would say that was a really meaningful thing. We need to go revisit that and talk it through. But that was one example of what free association could look like. Or it literally could be just sitting there and kind of letting anything come out that's on your mind, right? Even if it's random or seems unconnected. working through whatever comes up, you would then work through it. You work through for a lot of years in Freudian therapy, right? So anything that comes up, any conflicts, any feelings, let's talk about it. Let's try and find the source of where it came from. Probably childhood with your parents, right? Everything he would trace back that way, right? So it takes a long time to get back to that at times. And he would sometimes use things like hypnosis to help get there, or mesmerism, as it was called in the early days. He also was really big on something called transference. Transference is fascinating from a clinical perspective. And a lot of you were interested in being a therapist. You will get to experience transference. It is not always the most fun thing to have, right? Clients will often redirect feelings that they have toward people in their lives onto the therapist. Okay, so like my therapist is much older than me, right? And I see her very much like a mother figure, right? Like I tend to see her that way. I'm transferring feelings like toward like her or onto her from like my parents, right? Really common, right? But you can use that and work through it in therapy. It can be very clinically significant. It can be something you can then go and work through from this perspective. Clients will randomly become mad at you because they're mad at somebody else. It's almost like they're projecting those feelings. Freud was big on those different defense mechanisms as well. I will take the anger any day. Sometimes what happens is clients will fall in love with you. They transfer romantic feelings onto you, and they're not even geared toward you, right? So you have to remember and recognize that. But I once had a young man who was like a client of mine, and out of nowhere, he started bringing me gifts. And he was flirting with me. It took me like 3 months to realize it. I was like, it just went right over my head, right out. But I was talking to my mentor because you always have a supervisor when you're learning. And she's like, it sounds like he's flirting with you. I was like, oh my gosh, I didn't even realize, right? Like, it's barking up the wrong tree, right? I just didn't even put it together. But he would call me all the time and leave me messages. He started showing up random places. Like he figured out the other places I worked and would show up there. He was like obsessed with me. And it had nothing to do with me at all, right? Nothing. It was because he had someone in his life that he was in love with who was not available to him. It was his best friend's girlfriend, right? And so she was forbidden and unavailable. Just as I was forbidden and unavailable, he transferred that onto me. And we were able to work through it. It stopped, thankfully. It was so awkward. Once I realized what he was doing, I was like, oh man, please stop. Right? But you get a lot of this in therapy where they transfer those feelings. And if you can recognize it, it can be incredibly helpful, like clinically. Bless you. Something you can work through. Uh, any thoughts or comments or anything there? Yeah. Right. Yeah. Because that would be the easy thing to do, right? Like, okay, this needs to stop or we're not going to be able to see each other anymore. And again, I was in my clinical program. And so like luckily my mentor and I talked about this. And I was like, we brought it up one day, or I brought it up one day, and it kind of like all just clicked, right? So I tend to be kind of a like, let's just put it out there kind of person. And so I did. And it came out that he was like having feelings towards someone else. And the more that we worked through and talked about it, the less he put it on me and the more he put it on like the appropriate target. So it was just something that we had to like put out there and address the elephant in the room, if you will, right? Because it literally had nothing to do with me. It was just that he transferred those feelings onto me as a safe person, as a safe target. And people do that a ton in therapy, right? It's very, very common, especially if you've worked with someone for a long period of time. I've worked with my therapist for 5 years, so I tend to view her almost like a motherly figure when she's not, right? Like not at all, but I tend to view her that way. Anything else here for the moment? I have like the world's most awkward video to play for you. I just like to set the bar really low, right? But I think it's a really great example of what this type of therapy can, very typical of this type of therapy, right? The therapist is sitting behind the client or behind the patient. The idea there is they don't influence them, kind of out of sight, out of mind, making it easier to free associate. They talk about a dream, right? They talk about what that remind you of. What do you think of when you think of that item, right? Kind of free associating. He's just kind of sharing what's going on. That's very, very common That's what this type of therapy kind of looks like, hopefully in a much more updated way. But this is an old type of therapy. It's not used a lot on its own anymore, though there are people who are very Freudian or purely psychoanalytic, but it's more that we use little methods of it now rather than it tending to be by itself. Yeah.
So transference is under psychotherapy treatments, but is it only ever brought on by the patient or it can be brought on by the therapist?
Yes. So when it's the therapist developing feelings toward the client, we call it countertransference.
Well, I mean, like, cause it's under a treatment. So
Yeah.
would they be bringing it on to the patient?
So the thought is that it happens naturally, right? As you develop a relationship with a therapist, you then project or transfer feelings of people in your life onto them. So it's thought that it kind of just develops as part of therapy. And then you can use it to help with treatment because typically the stuff that you transfer is really meaningful, right? So, and then if it happens on the other end, which happens a lot too, right? Therapists oftentimes develop feelings for their clients, right? As if you've seen them for a long time, you might be irritated with them or really happy with them or view them like a child, right, of yours, right? That could be a bunch of different things. We call that countertransference. And both of them from this perspective are like helpful for treatment. So it just kind of emerges as part of therapy. Anything else from this perspective? Anything else Freudian before we move on? All right. Next. Froze here. Come back. Okay. Next perspective is the behavioral model. So from a behavioral model perspective, this one's all about learning and conditioning. You learn to act in a certain way. So we could also say life experiences. The things that have happened to you in your life shape who you are, shape what you're going through. You've been rewarded for faking being sick, right? And so now you do it more because you get attention and sympathy and care, right? You have been rewarded for acting out at school with attention. So now you keep doing it and you keep getting in trouble for the attention that comes with it. A lot of learning and conditioning and the things that have happened in your life playing a big role. So from this perspective, kind of two main types of learning, and this is where that intro stuff, again, kind of comes back. There's classical conditioning and operant conditioning. I would say one of the more like slightly challenging concepts in like an intro psych class, these two different types of conditioning, we're just reviewing them a little bit. But with classical conditioning, you learn to associate two things together. Okay, two things become paired or connected. And what we often see here is this is something that tends to be very like involuntary or like automatic. You aren't even aware that it's happening half the time. You learn to connect two things together in your mind in a very like involuntary, like unintentional kind of way. It's also very much about associations. And we get terms like unconditioned stimulus, unconditioned response, conditioned stimulus, conditioned response. Like you have this whole process of conditioning that takes place, and it tends to lead to like mental, physical, or emotional changes. So I have a colleague who got in an awful car accident when she was a child. I had like, people were like seriously injured. Luckily, nobody died, but it was a brutal car accident. And at the time of the accident, Eye of the Tiger was playing on the radio. Every time she hears the song Eye of the Tiger, she starts sweating. Her palms get sweaty. She's all freaked out and terrified because she associates it with that traumatic event. Trauma tends to have a lot of this built into it, like PTSD kind of reactions are very in the realm of classical conditioning, right? This is often portrayed in like films or like shows as a prank. I always think of The Office with like the Altoid, and he conditions him to salivate to an Altoid. There's a lot of great pranks. My favorite is this little boy, like they play this quack sound and shoot him with a gun every time that he's brushing his teeth. And when he hears the quack sound, he ducks every time. Like it's a lot of like conditioning that's taking place with that. Lots of examples in film. Yeah. Yeah. Very much so, right? And so when we get to phobias, for example, fears are all about conditioning, right? Like you learn to associate that item with fear. And so then we have to break that association down, change the association to something more pleasant. So exposure therapies like flooding, systematic desensitization are all about these two things, especially classical therapy, definitely, right? If you've ever faced a fear, what you're doing is this, right? You're breaking up the association or replacing it with something else. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. You really faced it. You did flooding. Yeah. Yeah. It's like the idea of jumping out of a plane to face your fear of heights, right? You know, and you hope nothing bad happens or it reinforces it, right? But really common for fears.
And, that also play back in some
Yeah.
Do you find in the time of things to have maybe seen people that I have feel the same way that we do English matter and just be getting to the bar or
Yeah.
specifically just playing and it doesn't have to be that particular song playing.
So the tricky thing about PTSD and something traumatic is any part of the event can remind you, right? Like, so it could be getting in the car, it could be the time of day, it could be the weather, it could be the song, it could be anything. So what you typically do is identify what the triggers are, and then you would work through them, right? So like with that example I gave you, you would listen to that song and try and deep breathe and calm and quiet in a place of safety. And the more that you do that, the less power that song's going to have, right? Because you're slowly removing the association, right? And that can take a long time to do, but that's a big part of like behavioral therapy, is identifying those triggers, right? So let's get in the car and take a minute and deep breathe and be calm and just be present and be safe. The more you get into the car, the more you have those moments of safety, the less you're going to think about it. It might come back randomly, but you're slowly breaking the association. Yeah. Other thoughts or comments? Anything for the moment? Yeah.
Having a car film, I didn't know what to do for a long time. It's like you get in a car, it's like you have to get in a car and everything.
Yeah.
But like after time went by, I was okay living, but then that was a date.
Yeah.
I wouldn't even know why. I'm like, why am I like? And I realized it was a date.
Yeah.
I make myself more aware of it. So I'm like, okay, this time, this where I'm gonna like make myself not just have that trigger moment. So it's hard to conquer PTSD because it comes in very many different ways.
Yeah. It's a very long, slow process, especially if you've had a really traumatic event.
Okay.
Yeah, and I was gonna say, and then there's CPTSD or complex PTSD, and that's lots of smaller, like little T traumas instead of a big T trauma, right? And with that one, it's even harder because sometimes you can't identify them because they often happen when you were very little. And so you might not even remember what they are, but you have these associations that you would then break down over time, slowly, in therapy. That's the idea behind it. Pavlov is the one who invented this, right? Pavlov was the one who invented classical conditioning. It was with dogs, salivating in dogs, right? So what he noticed is he was doing this experiment with digestion on dogs. And when he would walk in with the food, the dogs would start salivating because they were expecting the food, right? So that just the sight of him made them salivate, right? And so what he tried, he's like, what if I ring a bell and then present the food? Ring a bell, present the food, ring a bell, present the food. And the dogs started salivating to the bell because they learned to connect or associate them together. And then he would break it and replace the bell with other things. I have a little video of that. The dog wags its tail, which is kind of cute, right? But I'll play this for you. It's just like, it's a couple of minutes, but it shows you that problem. But if you can break that connection, then we can sometimes uncondition it or decondition it. A very, very common type of learning, but it's very automatic, very involuntary, and you don't even often know that it's happening. On the flip side, the other type of conditioning is operant conditioning. And operant conditioning, little different, right? This one over here is very like voluntary. You choose to react in a certain way, right? Most of the time, based on what you are like connecting with each other, based on the consequences of your behavior. My children this morning, I woke them up. I woke them up like 9 times. 9 times I went in there and was like, I need you to get out of bed. I need you to get out of bed. Get off your phone. Get out of bed. Get off your phone. Get out of bed over and over and over again. If you don't get up, I'm going to take your phone away, right, for the rest of the day. So mean, I know, right? Like, but I gave 9 opportunities before I threatened the phone, like removal, right? That's a consequence. I am going to take your phone, something you want, because I want you to get out of bed tomorrow morning when I wake you up, right? You choose how you're going to behave. It's a voluntary choice based on the consequences of your behavior. So this is all about reinforcers and punishers. A reinforcer is something that is going to strengthen a behavior. It reinforces it or strengthens it, right? Like typically a reward can be a little more complicated than that, but for our purposes, right? You get good grades, I'll take you out to ice cream, right? You want to get good grades again because you want ice cream. That was my childhood right there, right? Like if I got all A's, we went to ice cream. I got all A's, right? I wanted ice cream. Like for me, that worked. For my kids, it's $20. You get all A's, you get $20. They're like sold. My 13-year-old has never gotten less than anything like all A's because she wants money so she can buy clothes usually right now, right? Everything's about clothes at the moment, right? Or like you guys had a great week, first week of school, let's go out to dinner as like a reward, right? Like, so you can reward a behavior to increase it. It gets a little more complicated than that, but we don't need to worry about that for this class so much. Or you can punish the behavior, right? When you punish something, you hope you do it less. Like if I took away their phones, right? I hope that tomorrow morning they'd get up because they don't want to lose their phone, right? Or like you're going to bed early tonight because you guys kept coming into our room after we put you to sleep. So tomorrow you go to bed earlier. Technically, you can add and subtract. There's positive and negative punishment and reinforcement. It's beyond what we need to worry about here. But in general, we're trying to either increase or decrease a behavior through rewards and punishers. And what changes here is a behavior. You have a behavioral change. You get out of bed faster. You get all A's, right? Whatever the behavior it is that we're trying to reinforce, right? You hopefully have a behavioral change that goes with it. So you can use either of these. These are both very much in play, but they're big parts of this approach, right? We're looking at what have you learned to do, either automatically or not so much, right? But they both are very intertwined with each other. A lot of like rewarding and punishing and changing associations here. Any thoughts, comments, questions, anything here? Yeah, is that a hand? Yeah. Sure.
With operating conditions, classical conditions, and rehabilitation.
Okay.
And I was wondering if there are studies that show some effective comes to this, either doing it yourself and with yourself to make
Yeah.
and many people out there use the one and what kind of, how would that process look like? If and what would it kind of like press I guess to I apologize.
You want to be fine.
I was kind of just kind of curious about the time between possible and
And it feels like such a cop-out like response, but it really depends on the person and what is reinforcement. So the tricky thing is you have to identify what is keeping the behavior going, right? Like, so why is that drug so rewarding? Is it the feeling that you get when you take it? Or is it what it leads to, right? Like, so let's say somebody takes, they are using marijuana, right? Is their substance that they're addicted to. And in addition to enjoying the feeling that it gives them, it allows them to actually go out and be social in like a comfortable way. Like, so then all of a sudden you have all these layers of what's reinforcing. And so oftentimes you have to combine these two to address all the different layers, but you have to identify them first, which requires some insight on the part of the person who's using it, which can sometimes be the issue that keeps it from going. So it can be either. It's often the both that you use. And they can both be wildly effective depending on what's reinforcing, right? Is it something that you're aware of or not? Oftentimes with substances, we might even do something to make the substance not work the same way. So for example, if someone's addicted to alcohol, there's a drug you can take that makes you vomit the second you have an alcoholic beverage. And now the easy solution is you just don't take the drug, right? Like before you drink. But if you're really trying to break the habit, then all of a sudden it makes that drug unpleasant. Right, and so then you're using classical conditioning, and you're also kind of punishing that person when they drink the sip, right? So it could be a little bit of both that you would use. Both would be more effective typically, if that answers it.
Yeah. And I have another question. How would either of the author possible conditioning play as conditioning play that have behavior studies?
Yeah.
And well, one or the other, before research that showed.
Yeah, I mean, and it's kind of the same again too. So with behavioral disorders, it's usually more here. Because oftentimes there is something that's very strongly reinforcing it, and it is kind of a choice. So typically we would be more here. And oftentimes we're looking at children with behavioral disorders, which is a little more like tangible to be here. This one's much more like kind of easy to spot a lot of the time, as long as you can identify what the reward or punishment is, versus this one can be very subtle. Like it might be hard to identify because you might not even be aware of it, right? Like, and that would be what makes it so hard. Yeah, sure. Anybody else? Anything else for the moment? From this perspective, then, and we've been talking about these, right? I've mentioned these. We identify the behavior and then we change it, right? Kind of like we've been talking about with the questions. So we can do what's called a token economy, really common with children. I guarantee you've all had a token economy at some point in your life. If you ever got stickers on a chart at school, or little cards or points or check marks, and you could trade them in for like a prize or a privilege, that's a token economy, right? We did this a ton when our kids were potty training. Like all the little things that they did right, they got a sticker. Certain number of stickers, they got like a prize, right? And so token economies are really common with children. I mentioned flooding. Like flooding is when you face a fear head on. We'll talk about this a lot when we get to phobias. And systematic desensitization is more like little steps toward facing something. You systematically desensitize someone to something they're afraid of. So let's say you were afraid of heights, like you mentioned, right? Instead of going to the top of like the tallest roller coaster you can find and riding it, that would be flooding. Systematic would be like, let's go up to the second floor, then the third floor, and the fourth floor, and you breathe and you're calm and you kind of systematically work through it. So this leads to a lot of treatments, which are very commonly used with anxiety and phobias and fears. So when we get there, we'll talk a lot more about all of these. One more, and it's kind of a two-part, but the cognitive model here, let me put this over on the board. Okay, so the cognitive model is all about like thoughts and expectations. What are the automatic thoughts that you're having? Are they logical or illogical? What are your expectations about what's going to happen? Right, doing a lot of like assumptions, right? What kind of assumptions do you have about an event or about a thought or whatever? False assumptions, black and white thinking, overgeneralizations, a lot of like problematic thought patterns can lead to struggles, right? And so oftentimes what we do in this perspective is we try and change the thinking patterns. My big one that I've learned over the last 5 years in therapy is don't forget to check the facts. The therapist says that all the time. Check the facts, check the facts, check the facts, right? I was talking about this yesterday. I was like, I'm really worried about soccer next week. What if I can't do everything because I can't run, I can't kick, right? I'm going to lose my spot. And she was like, to who? They don't have any other coaches. You're not going to lose your spot, right? Like, check those facts, right? You're upset and stressing about something that's not even possible. Like, who would you lose your spot to? They don't have anyone to replace, So matter of fact, it was like, okay, like, you're right? It's easy to get caught up in the emotionality of it from this perspective. Let's stop. Is that accurate? All right, let's check the thoughts that you're having. Can we change them? And thereby rein in your thoughts and feelings that you have related to it. Very directly related, very common model now, CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy. We combine those two perspectives to look at your thoughts and your behaviors, right? So this is a really, really big, like, contemporary model of how can we combine them together and utilize both, right? So we'll look at the thoughts and the behaviors. It's a combination of this plus your thinking patterns and checking the facts and assumptions and so on. Really big tenet here, mindfulness. Mindfulness is a huge thing in the last like 5 to 10 years, right? Being mindful, be in the present moment. Most of us are often like thinking ahead or thinking back. We're not right here and right now, right? And that leads to anxiety. It leads to depression. It leads to stress, right? When you can be intentionally and non-judgmentally in the moment, you tend to be better off than when you're like not present. That's a really big part of CBT, focusing on being mindfully aware of the moment you're in, right? Come back to right now. You're in the future. You're stressing about the future. Come back to right now where you don't have as much of that anxiety. Mindfulness is a big one for CBT. Yeah. Yeah, so dialectical behavioral therapy, very common here. It's a big part of CBT. So DBT is part of CBT and it's often used for BPD, right? See how many letters I can throw at you, right? So it's a very big focus for things like borderline personality disorder, which we'll get to later in the semester. But it's here. It's part of this model. You're looking at the thoughts, the behaviors, kind of like spelling out a whole thing of like how you can examine them together. But yeah, it's part of this. Yeah, it's a kind of a niched part, right? So you do all sorts of little techniques where you are like examining the thought that led to an emotion, that led to a behavior, and where can we stop the cycle? Very commonly used for like bipolar disorder and borderline personality disorder, kind of more severe distortions that can happen with both of those. And we'll talk about it more a little bit when we get to borderline in the personality unit. Did you have a? Yeah, in the cognitive model, right? Kind of that all or none thinking, or like everything's gonna go horribly and like always seeing the negative and like kind of following up, sometimes called snowballing, right? Where you take a thought or a fear and you take it all the way to the most like potential disastrous end, right? Like catastrophic thinking or catastrophizing or snowballing. Yeah, that would be within the cognitive models. It's your thoughts, right? Anything with your thoughts. So we have a couple more models, but I'm going to stop here so I can take attendance for the last time, right? So starting next week, I'll just pass around a little sheet and you'll sign in and we'll get those like 4 or 5 minutes back, which is exciting. So I'll give you a second if you want to pack up, and I left everything up here if you need to like take a picture of it before we end. I'll take attendance and we'll call it a day.